Hey there, friends, and welcome to this Life Without Limits. I'm your host, Weston, and today's episode is going to serve as a little bit of an update on what's been happening with me, my health, with my life the last 6 months or so. It's been a while since I have recorded an episode, and I felt like it was time to get back on the horse. So that's really the reason I am doing this episode today. Partly it is to fulfill a promise that I've been making to myself for the last few months, since I have been getting physically better and better after my cancer treatment, and to also remove something that's been a little bit of a psychological and creative blocker for me. So that's why I am doing this episode and running the clock back to mid-September to catch you up on what's been going on. And in doing so, like in preparing my notes for this episode and reflecting back on what's really transpired over the last year, just really noticing a lot of feelings and emotions coming up that in many ways I feel like are part of the integration process of going through a journey like this. And also realizing that, during the really like deep phase of my treatment, week 4 until the end, which is about where I left off with these episodes, just acknowledging that I had a very limited capability to connect with some of the more subtle and nuanced layers of emotion that I was experiencing at that time. So been paying attention to that as I've been preparing to record this. I'm going to go kind of week by week during, like as I'm reflecting back on my treatment portal, and then month by month from November until the present moment. So, and within those chunks of time, talking a little bit about what's going on with my health and my cancer during that time frame, and then when it's appropriate, and it almost is always, what's also going on in my life at that time too. So a little bit of like health, life, week by week until I get through treatment, and then month by month from November until now. And really this whole exercise for me in recording this episode and putting it out is not to, really do anything other than to offer myself a gentle reminder that I need to give myself grace and forgiveness when and where I need it. I also need to watch out for how I create the specter of expectations in my life, or this false pressure to perform, and what impact that has on my sense of peace and also my ability to be present with what is. So that kind of came through for me this afternoon as I was wrapping up my notes and getting ready to record, that sometimes I set out to do things with the best of intentions, and when life happens, as it always does, I can be very, very hard on myself, very critical, shame myself a lot around not living up to whatever invisible standard I set. So it's just been interesting to look at that as I have been moving through the last few months of life. So all that being said, let's go ahead and dive into the recap. And so this is going to pick up week 4. which was September 23rd to 29th. And in terms of what was going on with my treatment and my health at that point, this was the week where I had radiation treatments 17 through 21. It was also the 5th week of chemo treatments for me. And each week to get chemo, I had to go and get blood work done to measure all kinds of things, all kinds of levels in my blood to make sure that I was good to go to receive chemotherapy. And, just as a reminder, the chemotherapy drug that I was receiving or that I received was cisplatin. That is a pretty common chemo drug for this type of cancer that I have. And so my blood work is looking good in week 4. I wasn't really experiencing any side effects from the chemotherapy. And with cisplatin in particular, there's nausea that comes with chemotherapy. I was well medicated to avoid any feelings of nausea. Thank goodness. And I, at that point was not experiencing any tinnitus or ringing in my ears. I had no neuropathy or numbness in my, fingertips or feet, anything like that. So doing good on no side effects with chemo. But I will say that, my mouth pain at that point was really beginning to become a struggle. It was, even in the previous week, I was already beginning to notice some mucositis in my mouth. That is basically, it's radiation burns and your body trying to heal what's happening to it in real time, and so I'll share some pictures when I get to week 5 about, what was going on in my mouth. And I should probably just pause and give the usual disclaimer of, if you're squeamish in any kind of way, I am going to be sharing some photos of, what's going on with my body. But, the mouth pain is becoming a bit of a struggle, despite the fact that I'm taking almost 3,000 milligrams of gabapentin a day. I am taking probably 4 to 5 milliliters of oxycodone, liquid oxycodone, 4 or 5 times a day. And then I also have this lidocaine based mouth rinse that is meant to sort of numb the inside of my mouth to help me eat anything or drink anything, and I'm noticing that it kind of helps, but not really, and so the byproduct of that is, I am gradually losing weight, and from the previous episodes, you'll be able to visually tell that, that I'm losing weight, but it really is beginning to become concerning to, my doctors. I keep getting threatened at this point with, a feeding tube, and I'm still, holding this as like my, number one goal is in this whole process is to not get a feeding tube. Right. And so what I began to do, during this week and for a little bit the following week was to start counting my calories and just trying to like hit a caloric intake target of about 2,500 calories a day. I was looking at the list and it's like, 3 servings of cream of wheat plus butter plus maple syrup is 600 calories, whatever it is. Right. Having one protein drink is 500 calories. Having a quart of lobster bisque soup, maybe 1,000 calories. Right. And just, really desperately trying to like give myself the nutrition that I needed so that I could kind of like stem this weight loss. But overall, I think, I am able to sort of keep up a positive attitude, through the whole experience, so a few things that also happened that week. My friend Sound came to visit Kreia and I again. Really just appreciated him. He came, about 3 times to visit me in the hospital and hang out with me when I was getting chemo. Kreia and I we began to, as my hair was growing out, this, wild hairdo that I cultivated during my treatment journey, we began to just like kind of compare each other's like wild hairstyles, which probably also kind of paralleled how life was going with us, just frazzled and a little disoriented, and like, how in the hell did we end up in this experience? um and then the other thing that kind of happened that week, I mean, obviously I suspended recording these podcasts because I just couldn't um really speak for uh, with any kind of like presence or comfort. My mouth was really sore. I just couldn't get it out. So I suspended, um, doing the podcast recordings and the weekly updates. I suspended the Monday morning meditations that I was doing on Insight Timer. And, also notice at that point that like my posts on social media, and again, this is where, I set these expectations for myself, like, I'm going to update everybody weekly on what's going on with me. And I'm going to post something on social media every single day, and underneath all of it is a desire to be of service and to share in real time, what's happening both inside my body and, like physically and emotionally and spiritually, what I'm experiencing. So there's that desire to serve in that way. And also just a realization that like, I didn't have it, and the dissonance inside of me during that experience, and really like from that week until, recently, um, it's been a real struggle. And so when I talk about, grace and forgiveness and, watching how these expectations or, sort of this false pressure to perform, how I set myself up for those situations that are really hard to fulfill sometimes. So week 5 was September 30th through October 6th. And this week in particular is radiation treatment 22 to 26, and also my 6th round of chemo. Again, blood work came back good. So I was cleared to get chemo that week. Still not experiencing any side effects from chemotherapy, no nausea, no tinnitus, no neuropathy. So these are all good things. Staying hydrated as best I can. And one of the things that, we begin to notice is that there is a significant reduction in the size of the lymph node on my neck. And I'll share, some photographs of this. Also, the tumor in my tonsils, some significant reduction in the size of that, as well as the presence of the cancer that had begun to, kind of invade the base of my tongue on the back right side of my tongue. So those are all positive things, and simultaneously, the radiation damage and the mucositis in my mouth is really beginning to affect my ability to nourish myself. And when I went in for chemo that week, my radiation nurse, Richie, came in to check on me and see how I was doing and how my pain was. And I told him, I was like, man, I'm okay, but I'm not great. So he recommended that I switch from oxycodone to Dilaudid, which is probably one of the most powerful narcotic opioid painkillers that there is. Very effective, very addictive. And of course, the whole time I have a lot of hesitancy around introducing these medicines into my body because of those potential side effects. And because I also have a history with addiction, whether it's alcohol or tobacco or other things, like I know that about myself. Um, so I do get switched over to Dilaudid, which I'm incredibly grateful for. And I am taking 8 milliliters, and really the maximum you're supposed to take in any dosage is 10 milliliters. So I'm taking 8 milliliters in this syringe, this liquid Dilaudid, 4 to 5 times a day. And it helps tremendously with the pain. But at that point, like once I go on that medicine, I can't drive anymore. So Kreia jumped in to help me, drive Arlo to school every day. And, the days that I had radiation treatments when he was with me, we would ride to the hospital together in the morning, and he'd jump on the bus and get to school, so it was really, challenging, I guess, emotionally to begin to, have to really rely on others to help me. And that's been a big theme through this whole journey is asking for help, being open to receiving help in all of its forms, whether it's driving my son to school or taking me to get radiation treatment or accepting the financial donations and contributions that people have been making through our GoFundMe account, accepting people's offer to, for healings or treatments outside of what I'm getting. And, so that's been a real lesson to learn in this process. So that kind of wraps up week 5, and moving into week 6, on the health front, this is a big week, right? So this is my radiation treatment 27 through 31 of 35, right? So I'm almost done with radiation, and it is my last week of chemotherapy. So go get the blood work done. Everything's cool. I have my last chemo infusion on October 10th, on Thursday, October 10th. Still experiencing no side effects from the chemo. I am beginning to, or, continuing to shed weight. I mean, at this point, I'm probably hanging around in like the low 160s, maybe high 150s. And as a, that's a lot for me. And just noticing like radiation burns on my neck. And I'll share some pictures of this and some other things from this week. But, just noticing that. So needing to care for, the inside of my mouth and everything that's going on there, the outside of my neck and everything that's going on there. And, honestly, like some days I just felt like I was barely able to hold back the tears on the radiation table. My mouth hurt so bad at that point. It was really dry. I could barely swallow. And the radiation treatments really just, it felt like I could almost barely make it through. Right. So, you'll remember that like I have to be strapped down to this table with this mask on in order to hold my head in place so that the radiation gets to the right spot. But I also have in my mouth, I have a filling on my top back molar on the right side that I've had since I was a kid. And I guess it's lead, something like that. And I don't remember talking about this in earlier episodes, but anyway, Dr. Cutt, my radiation doctor, was concerned that when the radiation hit that maybe it would fly or reflect all around and like wouldn't be controlled. So I had to like put a little wax form all the way back in my mouth. And mind you, like anytime I touch this side of my mouth and like go in there to put this wax in, it sucks. Like it really hurts. So I got to get this wax in there. And then I have to put this like mouth guard in, that looks like a boxing mouth guard or a football mouth guard, hockey mouth guard, whatever you want to think of it as. Jam all that in there and then like strap my head down to this table for 15 to 20 minutes, and I just some days was like, how am I going to make it through this time? And all I could do, I have this little, this beautiful little purple heart stone that Kreia gave me, back when our love was new. And I held that every single day in my treatments. I just held that in my hand or on my chest. And all I could do was just focus on my breathing, inhalations and exhalations, and trying not to swallow for those 15 minutes or so. Because if I initiated that swallowing reflex, it just, for whatever reason, it triggered so much panic in me, because my tongue would get stuck to the top of my mouth, and pulling it off would, like, almost like, I mean, it was terrible. It was terrible. So radiation is pretty rowdy. At home, I'm spending a lot of time working on this 1,000-piece puzzle that I got, which Kreia got me, that was like this psychedelic picture image of the universe. So it was not easy to work on. And, being like high as a kite on Dilaudid, barely able to maintain consciousness and trying to work on this puzzle, it was a trip. Also watching, like I said, a lot of Chef's Table. I've always been a fan of that show, but for whatever reason, it came back into my consciousness hardcore during this journey. And so, as I was able to cook for my family, not really for myself, I was just enjoying watching that. And so there was that. And then, the real big event of the week was, the bell ringing party, and, baking cookies for everybody in the chemo ward who wanted some. Kreia and my radiation doctor, Dr. Cutt, some other friends from the area came to support, my bell ringing ceremony. We had a Zoom call, for anybody around the country, any of our friends around the country who wanted to join. So it was really beautiful. And, we had a conga line around the chemo ward, which was, in hindsight, kind of ridiculous, but at the same time, it was really, meaningful to have like all of those people present, to bring some sort of elevated energy and celebration and happiness and joy into that space, into those rooms, into around the families and the other people that are sitting there receiving chemo, just for a moment. Cause it can be really like lonely and hard and sad in that part of the hospital, with so many people that are so sick, and just, praying that they're gonna that medicine that they're receiving is going to heal their body in whatever way is possible. So I finished out the week with a very special visit from a friend of mine who I have known since 2011. My buddy Jeff Castellaz came to sit with Kreia and I. He just came and hung out here in the apartment with us for a couple of hours on that Saturday at the end of that week. And, Jeff and I have known each other through the Pavlov Foundation, which he was a co-founder. He is a co-founder of, and it was named after his son, Pablo, who died of Wilms tumor when he was 6 years old. And, Jeff and I got to know each other through the Pavlov Across America cycling event, which is an annual fundraising event that this organization does to help raise money and awareness in the fight against pediatric cancer. And so Jeff and I hadn't seen each other, gosh, in probably a couple of years. And he was out here for a friend's wedding, just quick in and out, and took some time to come and sit with me and just share some stories and to just, be in each other's presence for a little while. So really grateful to him for taking the time to come and see me. So that was a really special way to end week 6, and it brings me to week 7, which is the last week of my treatment. Week 7 is October 14th through the 20th of 2024, and at this point, I'm down to just radiation. I had treatments 32 through 35, so it was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. My last radiation treatment was on October 17th. Still having no side effects from chemotherapy. I'm still checking in with them, reporting back on how I'm feeling. Really continuing to shed a lot of weight. At this point, solidly in the mid 150s, if not a little bit lower. I can't physically eat or drink too much. I'm just noticing in my body that everything is either too hot or too cold. Even like the simplest, most blandest foods somehow sting my mouth. And the medication and the lidocaine is really not helping a ton. And my chemo team saw that I needed to begin taking a thyroid supplement, levothyroxine, to support my thyroid. My TSH levels and T4 levels were kind of off at that point. So I began taking Synthroid, which I have not taken in a long time. But, the radiation treatment and everything else had really just kind of like triggered my thyroid. And of course, it's not too far outside of the field of, where I'm getting blasted with radiation every single day, so began to take that. And also, starting to notice, really how disconnected I am from my emotional range, how disconnected I am and how disconnected I have been. And that inside of me was just kind of like a sort of moment, not really able to feel much, which is interesting because I've been working on that a lot in my personal growth journey, So, as far as the team was concerned, they were really thrilled with the outcome of this treatment sequence. For all intents and purposes, the tumor in my tonsil was gone. And this lymph node had been, greatly reduced. And, as I was speaking to Dr. Cutt, I had my last day of radiation on Thursday. She had me come back in on Friday, the day after, just to check up. And she said that sometimes that lymph node will take a while. Like mine was so big that it wouldn't be uncommon for it to take a while to really like go all the way down. And so, but overall, like I was just feeling, pretty terrible. I went into that weekend, with the full dose of radiation in my body at that point, the full schedule of chemo. And man, I was just smoked, I mean, in all honesty, I was probably, I think my weight was, really low 150s. So I was really in it, I think is probably the best way to say it. In terms of, how life was going that week, like it really is a mixed bag, right? I began that week celebrating my daughter Abigail's adoption day, when her mama and I got together back in 2006. Abby was 5 years old, and I loved her from the moment I met her. Probably even before I loved her mama, and so after our son Arlo was born in 2008, I decided that I wanted to adopt Abigail. And so every year, I celebrate that kind of as like her birthday for me, like when I became her dad too. So is a really special way to kind of begin that week. And the other celebratory thing for that week was getting to ring the bell in the radiation ward. So much it was I think a more enthusiastic ringing of the bell, and I'll share a video here, a more enthusiastic ringing of the bell, but it was a much more subdued celebration. Kreia wasn't able to make that. Frankly, I think, she was really, as was I, she's just done with the whole experience. And, the two of us had been through unexpectedly, just a tremendous ordeal over the previous 7 weeks. And, but my nurse Richie was there, as well as some of the other radiation nurses. So it ended up being really special. I was excited to wrap that part up, and was really beginning to look forward to seeing my family at the end of at the end of the month. My sister and her now husband Stuart were engaged. They were going to get married the first weekend of November. And I had sort of set that as a finish line for me, like a target to hit, get done with treatment, get myself steady, and then go to Texas and see my family and celebrate, my sister and her husband's love. But, as life would have it, not exactly what happened, So moving into the post-treatment experience, looking at weeks 8 and 9, when I began my treatment journey, Richie, kind of affectionately called this week after treatment Hell Week. And, being hard-headed as I am, I was like, oh yeah, man, I got this. I'm not going to be in hell. It's gonna be fine. And turns out he was right, and then some. So kind of getting into that week. I mean, because it was a busy week, busy like 2 weeks. This is October 22nd through the 30th. I wake up on Tuesday morning, which was October 22nd, with this really high fever. I don't remember if it was like 103 or something, but it was rowdy. I was feeling terrible. And, I just remember sitting like here in my living room, and Kreia's like, you got to eat something, and I'm like, I can't, and I need help. Like I really was like kind of desperate and sort of like feeling broken. Like I could not do it myself. So we sent Richie a text message, and he, responded back in his characteristically funny way that, he said, congratulations, you've earned yourself a trip to the ER today. And so, we got some basic stuff together, and went down to the ER at Sibley for, just an evaluation, and I got in there and they took my vitals and they took some blood. And the next thing I know, I was being admitted to the hospital with neutropenic fever and severe malnutrition. I was down to 148 pounds at this point, and that's 30 pounds from where I began this journey. My immune system had basically crashed. My hemoglobin levels were super low. White blood cell count was super low. My neutrophils, all these are sort of like indicators of how well your immune system, how healthy your immune system was. And mine were all in the toilet, So they bring me into the hospital. I get taken, after I get in my room, I get taken down to see Dr. Cutt, and she and her, one of her assistants put a feeding tube in me. And I'm telling you, like, if you have never had the pleasure of getting a feeding tube inserted into your nose, it's about a 3-foot rubber tube that has like this device, this little apparatus on the end that has some weights in it that kind of holds it down in your stomach. And then like a little escape port right above those weights where the liquid or whatever is being put into the tube can flow out into your stomach. And then so they'd run this thing all the way down, like in your nose, all the way down your throat into your stomach. And man, I'm telling you, the insertion process is like a camera scope in one nostril, this feeding tube in the other nostril. And I have never gagged and dry heaved like as much in my life as I did during that experience. Um, it was terrible and scary. And Kreia was in the room with me, and I kind of would glance over at her, and she's just like tears in her eye, just crying. And it was really hard for her to be in that environment and to see me going through all of that. And I was really grateful when it was over and done, because once we got back up to the hospital room, I was able to begin receiving nutrition, and they had it sort of on a drip, like an IV drip thing for a while. Like it's just this sort of like brown liquid, like very highly nutritious formula, basically. So that was just kind of like dripping down into my nose, into my stomach. I was receiving hydration, receiving medications through IV, just trying to get me stabilized. And, I will just say that, it was pretty scary, right? Like that whole experience was pretty scary. Some of the other things that, happened on the health front during that experience, they because my hemoglobin levels were so low and they weren't really bouncing back as I was, receiving this nutrition and receiving the medication, they wanted to give me a transfusion, a blood transfusion. And I've never had a blood transfusion. I mean, again, I've never been in a hospital like this before, right? Never had a blood transfusion. And so they're talking to me about, do I know if I need pre-medication for a transfusion? I'm like, I don't know. I don't think so. I don't even know what that means. Right. And so they're like, okay, cool. We'll go ahead and give it to you without the pre-meds. And I'm like, fine. So this was on, I think I got admitted on Tuesday. And I think we tried to do the first transfusion, maybe on that Thursday. And as the nurse was, kind of bringing the blood in and kind of setting it up on the IV stand and, getting it positioned in my arm and all this kind of stuff, she's like, okay, if you notice you're starting to feel strange or getting chills or, anything like that, call me, because that can be like a side effect of getting these things, getting a transfusion. I'm like, okay, cool. No problem. I got this. I'm going to take this blood. I can do this. And I'm telling you, about 3 minutes into receiving this blood, and I started to feel weird. And my daughter Abigail was there that day, just hanging out with Kreia. So the two of them were in the room with me, and I look over at Abby and I'm like, hey man, I'm starting to feel really cold, and I think we need to get the nurse, and as she goes to get the nurse, like I'm starting to like have like shakes, right? Like getting what would be like the chills, right? Like almost like hypothermic. And by the time the nurse comes in, I'm shaking so badly, and my teeth, my mouth is just like going like crazy. And what this condition is called is febrile non-hemolytic transfusion reactions, right? Like that's kind of like the really technical name. There's also a common name for it, which I forget at this point, but really just having like the worst chills of my entire life and convulsing at the same time. And my main worry, other than I guess maybe dying, um, was like biting my cheek or my tongue or anywhere over here on the right side of my mouth that was so, in such pain and so destroyed from the radiation that I was just begging for a towel to like put in my mouth. Finally got a towel in between my teeth so I wouldn't bite, my tongue off. So, they got me settled down, gave me some Benadryl and some Tylenol, which incidentally are the quote unquote pre-meds. And the next few days, I just really sort of rested and recovered. I transitioned off of the IV drip of formula, like nutritional formula, and was able to begin feeding myself with a syringe, which was incredible. Beginning to sort of care for myself in that way, building up that habit. My blood work did begin to stabilize, but they wanted to do a second transfusion to jumpstart this hemoglobin production and to really like get my immune system kicked back up. So came back at it again, second time, took the pre-meds, which again, Tylenol and Benadryl, who knew? And everything went fine, which is great. And over that time that I was in the hospital, my body really began to slowly recover, and my weight loss stabilized. I think I gained probably like 3 or 4 pounds, which was great, and I think it was the first time that, the gravity of what my body has been through in the previous, month and a half, that it really lands for me. I had a call with my family a few days into my hospitalization, and it really started to occur to me that I was not going to be able to make my sister's wedding, and I was really heartbroken by that. It's kind of all I've been looking forward to. So to have to miss that was tremendously sad and heartbreaking for me. I spent my time in the hospital playing my guitar a little bit, watching a lot of Chef's Table, of course. I had visits from, of course, Kreia came and spent a lot of time. Arlo came, my son Arlo, my daughter Abigail, their mom, Melinda, came and sat with me. I had some other friends from the area swing by and hang out a little bit. But really, in terms of like the I think probably the biggest experience, growth experience of that, time in the hospital was really a huge relationship test for Kreia and I. And it came in the form of a request from her to go to New Jersey for the birthday party of a really good friend of ours. This guy is, both our mentor as well as a friend, and is almost like a second brother to Kreia. And she wanted to go to this birthday party, and I noticed there were two things coming up for me. One was, knowing that I really, really wanted her to go and have this experience. I knew she needed that community. I knew she needed to be held and loved up on, and just cared for by people that really loved her. She needed to go have some fun, right? And the other part in me, which is the part that has ruined so many romantic relationships in my life, was the part that is really jealous, that can get to resentment, and like coldness. And I was noticing that part of me too coming up for review. And, ultimately I was like, I realized inside of myself that I did not want to create the same reality in this relationship that I have in previous relationships, to like I knew that I knew I could care for myself in the hospital. I knew I was going to be okay. And I also knew that I wanted her to go and care for herself, and so, so we decided that, yes, it was cool for her to go to New Jersey, that I was going to be fine. And thank goodness we made that decision. I mean, not only because it made our relationship more dope, but it spawned this idea for a theatrical production between her and a few of her friends that they ended up bringing to the Fringe Festival in New York in April of 2025. So many blessings came out of that one little moment of navigating some relationship challenges, So with that, I'll kind of move into November. And on the health front, basically what's happening for me in the entire month of November is I'm just home resting and recovering. I'm feeding myself, 5 of these protein drinks per day. They're about, 500-600 calories. And so that kind of gets me to that base level of nourishment. I am beginning to, sort of slowly gain some weight back. And, in mid-November, I had my first solid food since, mid-October, basically. I was able to get back on eating cream of wheat again. So it was nice to begin to have that experience of actually like feeding myself, because I wasn't really sure how it was going to go, having this feeding tube in, and can I swallow? And I mean, it's just bizarre what goes through your mind and your body in those sorts of experiences. I am beginning at this point to wean off of gabapentin and Dilaudid as the healing continues. And, the biggest thing to, kind of celebrate that month was getting my feeding tube removed the week before Thanksgiving. This was a big goal. I mean, since I missed the goal of going to my sister's wedding, I was like, I'll be damned if I'm not going to eat some Thanksgiving dinner, right? So we get the feeding tube out, which was incredible. The week before Thanksgiving, and really just in terms of like, life stuff that month. I mean, I began taking a lot of like ridiculous selfies. I had the pleasure of getting to attend Arlo's induction into the National Honor Society, which was just really, beautiful to be there in that presence as he was, sort of receiving that acknowledgement. I got my first haircut before Thanksgiving. I almost put it in quotes because I went to see my barber, Nathan, and he sort of pulled up the back of my hair and was like, he's like, man, your hairline is like 2 inches higher than it was before we started all this stuff, And so he's like, I don't think I can give you the haircut that you're looking for right now, because it's going to be really bizarre. So I got cleaned up. I'll put it that way. And then, we did take a trip up to New Jersey to be with Krea's family for Thanksgiving. We had to take the bus. I mean, I started driving like locally around DC and taking Arlo to school and that sort of thing, but I wasn't really comfortable driving long distances yet. So we ended up taking a bus up to New Jersey and back. And while we were there, I really had my first real meal since probably week 3 of my treatment, so like mid-September. And I had mashed potatoes and gravy and beans and prime rib and turkey and dressing and all the desserts. So it felt great. I mean, it was a bit of a stretch, to eat in that way, but it was worth it. And while we were up there, Arlo and I took a quick trip into New York City to kind of run around a little bit. We went to Jersey City to visit some friends of ours from Deep Space and to see a show by Chris Rock. I'll put a couple pictures up in here of that. Just, trying to enjoy ourselves. It had been, really obviously a rough fall. And it kind of felt like that experience was, a first real taste kind of normalcy for us in a while. So, a couple of days after Thanksgiving, Arlo and I take a bus down to DC, and Krea took Luna with her, our dog Luna, with her to Frederick to go support a group over there. And that kind of brings us to the end of November. And what I will say is that December 24 was really where, the real integration phase of this whole journey begins. Um, in terms of my health, overall, things are continuing to stabilize. Dr. Cutt is really happy with the recovery process. And I'll share a picture in here of giving her and Richie a Super Hug Club t-shirt from my buddy Sound. I was excited to do that, but I am noticing now that I am beginning to develop some tinnitus, right? Some ringing in my ears, some neuropathy in my feet. I'm having night sweats, like almost every night, like sweating through my sheets. Almost having to change the sheets daily, and just really having like some difficulty regulating my body temperature. And I share this with Rachel, my chemo nurse, and she wanted me to get some new blood work, and it came back with my TSH levels being pretty low. So I was taken off of levothyroxine at that point. And that was kind of, really the highlights of, the health front on for December. But life was really lifed hard in December. On Sunday, December 1st, Kreia called me early in the morning and had told me that Luna was having some trouble, like getting up and getting herself outside and going to the bathroom and all of this. And, because I was still, coming back into my body from like all of these medicines, and I'd been more or less weaned off of Dilaudid and gabapentin. I still couldn't quite connect with a sense of compassion and empathy, right? Like it was, I could, but also there's a part of me sometimes that goes into this mode of like almost like combat mode, like just wanting to get to the root of the situation and to solve a problem, right? And so Kreia is sharing with me that she doesn't know what's going on with Luna and this, that, and the other, and she's really concerned, and I can sort of hear like she's upset, and I'm like, look, just get in the car, get home, we'll figure it out when you get here, and so she and Luna eventually get home that like early evening, and I go down to the garage to meet them, and Kreia's sitting there in the car. Luna's in the back seat. She can't really move that well. Kreia's crying, and I kind of went into sometimes how I can be, just like, all right, Luna, get out of the car, like, let's go. Let's let's go inside. Let's, go to the bathroom, whatever we need to do. We ended up getting her upstairs, and, Kreia and I kind of got it. I mean, we got into a really uncomfortable fight, about what to do, how she was being, how I needed her to be, and ultimately, like, Luna's sitting here in our living room, like, I guess, kind of in her own dog way, like, what the hell is going on? Like, can somebody just pay attention to me and take care of me, And so we finally come to the agreement that we're going to take Luna to the emergency room, and there's an emergency vet that's open, in DC. So I, get her downstairs, get her into the truck, race down to this vet, carry her inside, and they see us right away. Like I didn't even have time to like register. See, the doctor was just like, get back here, put her down on the table. And they instantaneously like started to ultrasound her abdomen. And they're like, and they took a needle and kind of like drew some fluid out of her abdomen, and it was a lot of blood in there. And, the doctor was basically saying, look, she's bleeding internally. It could be from cancer. It could be from a ruptured spleen. It could be from a lot of things. And we could either operate on her, or we could talk about, putting her down. And I mean, I knew what the right thing to do was, but I wanted to like call Melinda and call Arlo and Abigail because, like this was our family dog. And I didn't want to make that decision, without consulting them, and so ultimately we ended up deciding to put Luna down that night. And so Cray and I just spent, really the next few hours, just comforting her and being with her. Had a FaceTime call with the kids so that they could say goodbye to her. And it was really just like, I don't know. I mean, it was probably one of the hardest, most difficult, and also most like beautiful moments of my whole life. Just like sitting there, kissing my dog on her head and like feeling her last breath on my cheek as, the doctor pushed the drugs into her body that stopped her heart. Like it was an incredible experience letting that dog pass. And her death triggered in me this massive contraction, where I'm blaming myself for Luna, whatever happened to Luna, for neglecting her. I'm blaming myself for how I've neglected everything that has fallen apart in my life, whether it was a marriage or a business or, any other kind of relationship, my health. This question of like, had I killed my dog, and I mean, all of that was so present for me. And, it didn't happen immediately, but like this really like was an invitation to really do some deep work in self-forgiveness. So I just have to say that, I'm really grateful to our friends Mel and Alex for allowing us to bury Luna on their farm out in Gaithersburg. Mel and Alex also held some really beautiful space for Cray and I to work through some relationship conversations that we needed to have with each other. Another thing that happened, I had a really profound astrology and human design reading that I won't go really deep into, but other than just to say that it brought to me a deeper understanding and alignment with how I want to be in this world and how to effectively do that. It's very validating, very illuminating. Simultaneously, I'm beginning to really experience some financial fear starting to become present. I haven't really worked or really felt able to work since September. And so I began to kind of experiment with driving for Uber, which ended up being like kind of a train wreck, a lot more trouble than it was worth. I ate pizza for the first time since before my treatment began. This may not sound like a big deal to you, but that was another milestone, was like when I was ready to eat pizza again, I was going to go to Amy's, where my daughter works, and have like this beautiful meal, beautiful Neapolitan pizza. So I was able to like do that in December, which is great. And then, kind of ended up the month putting the kids on a plane to Japan. They went to Japan with their mom for the holidays. And Cray and I were supposed to go down to Texas. We had these plans to go down to Texas to finally see my family. And on the way back from dropping the kids at the airport, I was just like, I can't get on the road and drive to Texas. I can't, and so she and I made the decision to, stay home and just be with each other, to have fun where we could. We went and got our, pedicures and manicures, which is really fun. And we just wanted to try and enjoy each other's company because it's just been such a tremendously difficult year that we had been through. And certainly that last month was like, a real holy shit, man, like what is even happening in life kind of experience. So we were just wanting to rest and heal. And we ended up, the month and the year in a journey with some friends of ours that was really beautiful and sweet and connected. It was a new moon simultaneously, and so there was a lot of like, really beautiful renewal energy available that we were tapping into. And at this point, I'm really beginning to strongly consider this question that has been present with me through this whole journey, which is, what is being asked of me in this life, and what purpose does this whole experience serve, and what do I need to say yes to come into greater alignment and integrity in my life. So this is kind of how we end 2024 and open 2025. And on the health front, I'm still continuing to stabilize in January. My taste and my appetite are continuing to improve. Weight's coming back very slowly. I'm still not super energized to get back into the gym or to exercise. I did begin some acupuncture treatments to address, not only my overall recovery, but to offer some therapeutic relief for this neuropathy in my feet. On the life front, energetically, a lot is going on. And I'm aware that, like, as I'm asking these big questions of my life, that my trust in spirit is really being tested. The winter here in DC was long. It felt really long to me and cold. And in January, we had, almost 2 weeks of snow and really like extreme cold. And so I'm really at this point in January, like navigating, this really present financial strain, right? Like the funds in our GoFundMe account were almost down to nothing. So I had to switch from like the insurance that I had previously to Medicaid. I had to get on Medicaid. I applied for disability. I consolidated as much of my debt as I possibly could and just sort of like negotiated and deferred other things that, I will address once I'm, stabilized and back on my feet again. I'm also sending out tons of applications for product manager, product design, creative director roles. And I really only got one opportunity with Meta to, potentially interview. And, simultaneously, I'm asking myself this question of like, what else can I do to turn back towards self-sufficiency, right? So that I'm not relying on things that are outside of my control for my own well-being, right? So I also had this really beautiful ancestral divination, and I won't talk much about that experience, but I came away with 4 rituals that I needed to perform out of this divination. One was a ritual designed to help heal the sexual shame that I have carried for most of my life, that, quite frankly, probably led to the choices that I made that introduced the virus into my body that gave me this cancer, right? So healing my sexual shame and my relationship to power, right? And so one of those rituals, or for that ritual in particular, I went out to Shenandoah National Park and hiked up Old Rag Mountain. I'll share some pictures of that hike on here. The other ritual I had to do was really just expressing gratitude for this second chance at life, and kind of just honoring my brush with death. Another ritual related to the relational healing that needed to happen between Kreia and I. And, a final ritual that was really designed to help me step fully into my purpose and my calling, right? So what is the vision I'm casting? Who are the collaborators I'm calling in? Who are the clients that I want to work with? And, I ended that month with a sense that Spirit really is, I sort of started off this month with like, hey, Spirit, I don't know what's going on here, and started and ended January with a sense that the Almighty God, the universe, Spirit is gently revealing my path to me, right? And whether that was the astrology and human design reading that I had in December, this divination that I had in January, some of the new client work that was coming in, the coaching client work that I was having. I restarted my Insight Timer meditations in January. I was having conversations with trusted individuals who were revealing and illuminating and validating some assumptions and hypotheses I was having about how I want to walk in the world, books that I was reading. I began a book called Soulcraft, which was, just like electrified my entire being. Validation and alignment and the facilitation work. And then also I had this, kind of goofy yogi tea message come up that I just wanted to share, which was never regret your mistakes. Admire the courage it took to attempt the unknown. I mean, I love yogi tea, but I also, love it when, the tea bag message really like lands hardcore. So what I allowed myself to do was begin to dive into some research and creative inquiry to begin to, play with that question of like, how can I turn back towards self-sufficiency, right? And just playing with ChatGPT and some other AI tools to, kind of get myself unstuck and off the blank page, So with that, it's kind of the end of January. It brings us into February. And here, what I want to do is just kind of talk about, the life updates first. Started off the month of February in Ohio. With CREA, we facilitated a 2-day workshop out there. It's the first time she and I had the opportunity to do that since June of 24, like the previous summer. And it felt so validating personally, but also in partnership between the two of us, like it was beautiful. And I mean, it was beautiful to like be in support of her in that way. But to also like see the potential of the types of containers that we can create for people. So that was an incredible way to kick off the month. I also rode my bike for the first time since September, which was, I mean, again, it was a cold ass winter. And the older I get, the less and less I want to go out in the cold. But nevertheless, I bundled up a little bit and went out and rode my bike for the first time. Abigail and I went to go see Fantagram. It's the first time she and I have been to a show since we saw Odessa in like the summer of 22, maybe. Far too long. But we did it right. We went to go see one of our favorite bands, Fantagram. I also, I've been dreaming of starting a young men's leadership group at my son's high school. And I began having conversations with one of his counselors like a year ago, maybe even a little bit more than a year ago, like before I was diagnosed with cancer. We started kind of spitballing ideas back then, but for a variety of reasons. I mean, he was busy, and then of course I got diagnosed and went into treatment. It didn't happen, right? But in February we were able to kick off the MacArthur Men of Excellence. So that was very exciting. And we meet every Thursday at during lunchtime at his school. And it's just cool to like drop in and to, to have like 4 or 5 teachers and staff from the school, male teachers and staff, myself, to come in and just hold space for these young men and their lives and their experiences. It's something that, I've wanted to do for a long time. It's also something that frankly, I probably could have used when I was growing up. So it just feels really nice to be able to like, bring that into his school. And that kind of got me to the middle of February when I was scheduled to go in for some follow up PET and CT scans. So it'd been about 3 months since my treatment had ended, and I went in to get a PET scan and a CT scan. And when the results came back, it showed some illuminated lymph nodes in my chest, right near my lungs, but not in my lungs. And this immediately triggered um, some concern that the cancer had spread from its original site into my chest, right? And so we began to draw. I mean, I don't want to brush over the gravity of that, and like really like the gut punch and like emotional, you know bomb that was. um and we began to, kind of game plan what would be necessary, right? Surgery, maybe potential for more radiation, probably not chemo, but maybe immunotherapy, just throwing all kinds of ideas out there. But one thing we did in particular was schedule a bronchoscopy for the beginning of March. So wanted to go in there, and I'll talk a little bit more about the bronchoscopy in a second, but just wanted to get a biopsy of the tissue and to really determine, what was going on. So weird month February was. And then, I'd mentioned in January I had, gotten a job opportunity or an interview opportunity with Meta, which I was really, really, really excited about. Um, and, my interviews were scheduled basically like the week I found out that maybe I have cancer in my body. So I asked my, I guess, candidate coordinator. I'm not really sure how she's, works in the HR squad. If I could reschedule, she's like, yeah, no problem, reschedule. I didn't tell her why. So I rescheduled for the following week, and yeah, I mean, what are you going to do? Right. Like maybe I have cancer and I'm interviewing for this job. It's just like, it's the most surreal, um, difficult to compartmentalize experience that I've ever had. And simultaneously running in the background is this question of like, what am I being called to do in this world? How am I being called to walk? How am I being called to serve? How am I being called to, create a scenario of greater sovereignty and greater self-reliance? Um, so I had the interviews. I thought they went okay. um, I had a great, the interviews themselves were great, but I was not, my candidacy was not advanced with the company. So um, I was a little disappointed and also a little relieved to have just made it through that process, um, and to get on with whatever was next. Right. So we have some conversations with a new medical oncologist, not new, but because I was on Medicaid, I couldn't see the same uh, doctors as I had previously in my treatment, right? So Sibley Hospital, Dr. Cutt, Dr. Budati, they're all in DC, right? So because I'm on Maryland Medicaid, now I have to go back to Maryland doctors in Johns Hopkins. So I'm seeing Dr. Seiwert, medical oncology in Baltimore. I'm seeing Dr. Page. She's a radiation oncologist in Bethesda, and just kind of like beginning to figure out like, okay, what are we going to do here? Like once this bronchoscopy comes back and we have a diagnosis, and I think everybody was pretty convinced that the diagnosis was going to come back that I had cancer, right, in my chest. So I'm also noticing at the beginning of March some gum recession in the back lower right of my jaw, on the inside of my gum, beginning to recede so much that my jawbone is exposed, which is deeply concerning. But I went to see my dentist, talked to my radiation doctor about it, and they were not concerned. I mean, it was definitely swollen and tender, but they weren't concerned about it at that point, and so despite me being freaked out that my jawbone is hanging out, um, they said, rinse with salt water and baking soda, just keep doing your mouth rinses, and we'll see how it goes. So we get into the bronchoscopy procedure, which is basically inserting a device into my esophagus down into kind of the area where my airway branches off into my lungs, and that's where those lymph nodes were lighting up. And you will have seen this from the PET scans. But they took some tissue samples out of there. They also did some swabbing, of the tissue in that area as well. Simultaneously, they drew some blood to do the NavDx blood test, which is the DNA test for cancer in my blood. And about a week later, we got the results from the biopsy that showed no malignancy in the lymph node tissue samples, which was amazing. However, there was this sort of like crazy fungal and bacteria result that came back, as well as some granulomas. Like that's really what was lighting up, were these granulomas in the lymph nodes. But the concerning news that we got back was that the NavDx test came back positive. We were hoping that it would be non-reactive or negative, because that would mean that there was no cancer in my body. But however, it came back positive, although only slightly so. Like the number that came back was 150, which will mean nothing to you. Doesn't really mean much to me. But for comparison, like before my treatment began back in August of 24, the number for my NavDx test was over 50,000. So that was one of the highest numbers that, my team had ever seen from this test. So having a positive result, even though it was low, meant that cancer is somewhere in my body, and most likely hanging out here in this lymph node. We did do a second NavDx test just to, make sure it wasn't a false positive. And that one also came back positive, around the same level, if not just a little bit higher, So, so I had conversations with Dr. Fakri, who is the surgeon who I was originally referred to back in August. She is, a vanguard in this particular realm of head and neck cancer. She's an incredible surgeon, incredible practitioner, and, having some conversations with her about, a surgical option, really aiming for late April, So, that's kind of the health update for March. In terms of, the life update, I thought that, things were going to go one way. Creus certainly thought things were going to be, positive, and we're going to be moving, shutting the door on this thing. And yet, here we are, not done yet. And even asking the question, like, if I had a job, like, could I even work? And also really feeling desperate because, like, my disability hasn't kicked in yet. It actually kicks in April. And yeah, like how is all of this going to play out, and simultaneously, I am beginning to have some exploratory conversations with Johns Hopkins about creating some support programming for men in cancer treatment and recovery. I am putting, energy towards where I feel like Spirit is leading me, not to places of fear and scarcity, which is really hard under these circumstances, I'm leaning into, you know, my coaching support with the couple of clients that I have. I'm leading my meditations on Insight Timer. I am, you know, doing everything I can to like be present for my son, to, you know, have time with my daughter as well, you know, supporting Kreia in the development of this play production that she and her friends are working on for April, you know, and really just trying to say yes to what feels aligned with how I want to walk in this world, you know, and I'm beginning at this point in March to develop some ideas for a 28-day meditation course for Insight Timer, like an offering on Insight Timer, big offering. And also just, you know, I want to take a moment to kind of acknowledge the undercurrent of impatience that I was really feeling as well. You know, like we were all, I think everybody, well, I don't know about everybody. I mean, my family, I love my family. They've been so, and my friends, my community, everybody's been so supportive and offering prayers and everything, so many things. But I know in my body, and I'm pretty sure in Kreia's body, like we're ready to be done with this. You know, that kind of takes me into April. And this month kicks off on the health side of things. It really kicks off with me, you know, starting to develop a sinus infection and some chest congestion, which is kind of typical for this time of year. I seem to always get something like that around late spring, early summer. So that starts coming up. Um, and, you know, Dr. Fakri, she wanted to, just because of like, you know, the urgency of having cancer in my body, she wanted to bump the surgery up to mid-April, but we weren't able to do that just because of, you know, life and also, you know, this ongoing kind of chest congestion piece. And so towards the end of the month, one of the things that I needed to do was a pre-op appointment to, you know, make sure that my heart and blood and everything else was ready to go for surgery. And my blood test came back with a really high level of TSH. So I was my doctor put me back on levothyroxine again. And there was some fear of going ahead with surgery because of some possible thyroid and anesthesia contraindications. I won't like go into that, but it was, you know, enough that, you know, there's this question like, should we do this surgery, you know, now, or should we delay it, you know, for a month, whatever. Also scheduled a follow up with the endocrinologist at that point too, you know, so lots of craziness around trying to just land on the operating table to, you know, take care of this next phase. On the life front in April, it's really interesting. I spent the first half basically of April in a 10-day silent meditation retreat in Delaware. It's a practice of Vipassana meditation where there's no talking, no journaling, no reading, nothing except like 8 hours of meditation a day, eating simple meals and sleeping, you know, basically just living like a monk. And, you know, it ended up being probably one of the most profound and clarifying journeys of my whole life. I experienced so much peace and integration during those 10 days. Had an amazing access to my dream life. I mean, my dreams were lit up every night. I began to, you know, be able to process, you know, what are called sankharas, which are basically, you know, I mean, you could think of them as like spiritual wounds that have been holding me back for years. Um, and, you know, it was really just, you know, kind of a profound reset. Like I said, um, I finished up Vipassana on the 13th of April, and I picked up Arlo in Wilmington and we drove to New York City for spring break, which was a jarring experience, to say the least, and beautiful. I say that just because 10 days of silence and then going to New York City can be a little different. But while we were up there, we visited some colleges that he's interested in. We visited Parsons at the New School. We visited Pratt. We visited NYU. We got to see. I took Arlo to meet people that were like very meaningful to me. My buddy Terry. We went and hung out in his music studio for a little while, and Terry and I have known each other since like 1997. Played music together. Love that brother so much. So it was fun to like, in the last time Terry had seen Arlo was 1. So just imagine like going from 1-year-old to, 17-year-old Arlo was bonkers. And then we also went to see my friend Mac Primo out at his studio in Brooklyn. We ate tacos together, and simultaneously we were there to support Crea and her friends in the production of their play, which is called Ayahuasca Inside Out. They had 5 nights at the Fringe Festival. So I got to play my flute. I got to do, drum on a little djembe. Arlo was a stage manager and helped shuffle things around and keep the show moving. And we just had like an incredible time. Like we all stayed in a house out near Prospect Park in Brooklyn. There were like 13 of us staying in this house, which was amazing. I mean, it was an amazing experience for all of us, and especially like being able to see what manifested from Crea and her friends out of that moment back in the hospital room in October when she was like, hey, I want to go to this birthday party in New Jersey. And I was like, you need to go to this birthday party in New Jersey. And all that, the internal machinations that we had to go through to make that happen. This was the reward, and it was incredible. So just another example of like spirit working all the time, like doing what spirit does, So anyway, beyond grateful for the opportunity to spend some time up in New York. Arlo also had a photography exhibition at his school, which was really cool to see. I mean, it's always cool to see his work, but it was really neat to see it on display in his school. And one of his teachers had selected these pieces and curated the show, and it was really neat to be able to see that. And just sort of like wrap up the month of April, I'm really digging into beginning to develop the content for this 28-day meditation course, continuing to sort of like cast those votes for how I want to show up and work in the world, and so that's how we kind of like wrap up April and moving into May. May has been, I mean, here we are, I'm recording this on May 17th. May has been an interesting month. This chest congestion that that started back at the beginning of April really hung on like for the whole month of April. And I went for a bike ride one day. I kind of felt good enough to go for a bike ride. And the next day it got really bad. I got a bad cough, lots of like, sinus drainage. And I ended up having a fever at the end of that first week of May. And I went into urgent care to get some antibiotics, and was also taking Tylenol and Benadryl, or Tylenol, ibuprofen, to try and knock the fever down, because my surgery was scheduled on May 6th. So we went to Baltimore on May 6th, showed up. I'm in the operation prep room. I got the gown on, the hairnet on, got my ass out, like I'm ready to go. And, we're having conversations with all the different teams, and the anesthesia team comes in, and I talked to him about, I've had this cough, but, I'm taking antibiotics and it's actually much better, and I don't have fever anymore. And all of this is, mostly true. But their head of anesthesia was like, we can't put you under, man. Like it's too risky, to do so. There was some concern that, I might develop postoperative pneumonia. There's other, potential complications during the procedure, like death, and I'm like, okay, well, cool. I don't want to do that. And I was literally like moments away from getting wheeled back. And this guy was like, no, we can't do this today. So we ended up going home. We rescheduled the surgery for the following Tuesday, May 13th. And I get a call the evening before we're supposed to go to Baltimore from the anesthesiologist. And he's like, hey man, we can't do this tomorrow. Like I need 2 weeks between, this thing and when we do this procedure. And I'm like, all right, so anyway, we scheduled it from the 13th to now, May 21st is, so this coming Wednesday is when I'm scheduled to go in and have this procedure done. I feel great. I know I've coughed during this episode, but it's infinitely better than it was. I'm on no medication. So unless something crazy happens, and shit, it sure could, it will probably end up going through this on Wednesday. So the other interesting thing that came up during this month is I had an initial consultation with the infectious disease doctor related to the bronchoscopy results from back in February, specifically the fungal and bacterial growth, like really kind of weird stuff that had shown up. She wanted to do some further blood and urine tests, just to kind of like get to the bottom of what's going on here. Their team, really, this is like real time. Their team is actively like kind of researching, how they want to treat this condition. And, what is suspected right now is that this is a non-tuberculosis mycobacterial infection. And I didn't really know what that meant. But the way my doctor explained it to me is that, it's a pretty hard to treat infection, like viral infection or bacterial infection. Yeah. And it takes, potentially months of antibiotics to clear this. And, I'm like, well, how did I get this? Because this didn't show up in August when I had my PET scan. And, now we have this PET scan in February and it's all there. And the thinking is that, I was really susceptible. My immune system was really vulnerable, during treatment. And, the lesson for me in hindsight is, to mask up for the whole shebang. And if there's something that, a lesson that I could, sort of pass along to anybody listening, is to really, really, really do everything you can to protect yourself and take care of yourself when you're in situations like this, and so, so that's kind of where we are right now on the health front in terms of, in terms of life this month. I've really, this month has really been defined by, getting myself well, getting over this chest infection and sinus infection, taking care or taking advantage of, these unexpected surgery cancellations. I've called it like bonus days, where I thought that I was going to just be like out, and really like dropping into, getting work done on my meditation course. I've completed that. It's now uploaded and waiting for approvals from Insight Timer. Crea and the kids and I, we went out to visit the place that we buried Luna. And we planted this really beautiful magnolia tree right next to her. We witnessed this incredible like triple rainbow outside of our apartment during the summer storm. And yeah, I mean, just really like appreciating life, and simultaneously acknowledging how much my patience is being tried in this experience, and how, like, even reflecting back over this entire like retrospective of my treatment, right? And probably even your experience of listening to this entire retrospective, how much my patience is being tried, and, how much my impatience has gotten me into really great difficulty and problems in my life. Like if I would have gotten surgery on May 6th, right? And I was impatient. I wanted to get that surgery done. Who knows? I might have been fine, or I might have ended up with pneumonia, or I might have died during the procedure. Who knows, right? But in each of these experiences, what I'm just being presented, the opportunity I'm being presented with, is to lean deeper into presence, deeper into patience, and to work with that, So that's it in terms of the cancer journey and where we are. Not across the finish line, in another phase, right? And hopefully this procedure will go really smoothly. I just want to acknowledge everybody that has been praying for me, for Crea, for our family, for my doctors, people who have donated money into the GoFundMe account. Like, I'm so grateful for that. Just the amount of care that I have received, that we have received, and the diversity in which that care has come. Just profoundly grateful for that. And, I trust that I'm going to move through this procedure effortlessly, that I will recover. I will slow down and be patient with my recovery. And yeah, we'll be on the other side of this thing before you know it, before I turn 53 in August. That's my next benchmark. It's my birthday. So with that, I'm just going to kind of wrap up this episode by saying that, this episode in particular, as I mentioned at the top, has been a big hurdle for me to get over. But my intention, once I get healed up and through this next threshold, is to begin bringing back the conversational style that I was, really starting to love before I was diagnosed. I have an episode with my friend Chris Waldheims that I recorded, over a year ago, that's been in the can, and a lot of other conversations that I'm excited to bring forward as this podcast continues to grow and evolve. And I hope that it continues to serve you. If so, please feel free to share it with somebody who you think might benefit from this. Again, thank you so much for your time, your patience. Be good to yourselves and be good to others. And I'll see you back here very soon. All right. Peace, y'all. That's it for this episode of This Life Without Limits. I hope you enjoyed this conversation and will join me again for future episodes. If you want to stay updated on new releases, hit the subscribe button below, and don't forget to check out the show notes for additional details and links. I'd also love to hear what you think about the content of this episode, so please feel welcome to drop any comments, thoughts, questions, critique, any of that below. Thanks again for joining me, and I look forward to next time. Until then, here's to a life without limits, my friends.